Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's Building Power. I am your host, Zakiya Jabbar. And this week, I have a very, very, very special guest, person that I have a deep amount of respect for, a person that I consider a friend and who is just all around amazing, badass attorney, mama, wife, lawyer, all of that. And I'm actually going to read her bio because it's that important that you all know exactly who we're dealing with this morning. Sister Nekima Levy Armstrong is the owner and founder of Black Pearl LLC. It is a consulting firm specializing in racial equity, problem solving, community engagement, and public relations. In 2016, she received the Distinguished Service Award from the Governor's Commission on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in Minnesota. In 2015, she was named 40 Under 40 by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal. In 2014, she was named the Minnesota Attorney of the Year by the Minnesota Lawyers and recognized as one of 50 under 50 most influential law professors of color in the country. She formerly served as a law professor at the University of St. Thomas Law School for 13 years as president of the Minneapolis NAACP and as an advisor to Black Lives Matter Minneapolis. Most recently, she became the executive director of the Wayfinder Foundation. Nekima, welcome, sis. I'm glad you could look. You so popular and like big time. Look, Oprah that interviewed you, and here you come and let me interview you. What's up, sis?
Hey, it's always a blessing to be able to connect with you, to be on the front lines with you. I'm grateful for your work, your energy, your enthusiasm for our babies. I mean, you get it in. You speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may. And I really appreciate you. And I'm thankful for this opportunity to be interviewed by you as well.
Well, you know, listen, I have the best mentors. I'm surrounded by the best, and you are certainly, you know, one of the stars in my life. You and I have connected several years ago, but most recently at the Wayfinder Foundation. I am one of the fellows, and you came in and really lifted that organization, and it's certainly taken it to new highs. But actually, that's not why we're here today. We're here to really spotlight your amazing work as an attorney, as an activist, and just as someone who I believe is one of our human rights heroes of this generation in this century. Like you're gonna be in the history books, sis. Like I'm convinced. I'm already knowing it, right? I actually got to know you several years ago. Actually, you were still the Minneapolis president of the NAACP. You were still the president. And I remember being like, because I was living in Dayton at the time, I was like, I ain't never seen no NAACP like this. I'm like, shit, let me see what's going on, because all the listen, don't y'all get mad at me. This is just my experience. I'm like, all the NAACPs I know don't really be getting down like that. They don't be doing nothing. Like, they don't be like in the face of the police and out in the streets with other activists and doing all this stuff. And I'm like, who is this sister? And I friended you on Facebook. That was the first time, because I'm like, I got to know who she is. So with that framing, what drives you?
Well, I honestly feel like God and the ancestors drive me. I feel like I'm on a path that was preordained for me to be on, and that no matter whatever decisions I made or mistakes I made, They always guided me back to where I needed to be, right? So I know that I'm a vessel doing what God called me to do. And I think back to my upbringing of having been born in Jackson, Mississippi.
I was gonna get to that. You a Southern sister.
Yes, I am. And I'm just thankful for having those roots and everything that my family instilled in me. You know, my family was poor, but it's like they taught me to be resourceful. And I saw community coming together and supporting each other. Like you couldn't go to nobody's house and not get fed and not get cared for. So all of those things made a huge difference in my life. And then when I was 8.5, we moved to South Central LA. And that was like in the early 1980s, around the start of the war on drugs. And it was like going from one world to the next. I was in what I would call like an enclave in Mississippi, being surrounded by Black folks who, you know, some had land, because we lived in rural Mississippi and we lived in the city, right? So some of our neighbors in rural Mississippi, they had land, they had cows, they had pigs, they were able to grow their own vegetables. So, and I saw people that would sell their products and things like that. But when I got to LA, we moved into a Black and Latino neighborhood. I remember seeing graffiti on the walls. I was like, where am I? You know? And as a kid, I really had to learn to become more street smart and watch my surroundings and really just begin to understand the dynamics of what it really means to live in poverty. Because I thought we were poor in Mississippi, but it was nothing like South Central LA. It was a whole kind of poverty that we experienced there.
Absolutely. You going through sort of like that. Your genesis reminds me of my own, and I kind of zoomed in when you said the start of the war on drugs was the early 80s. That's literally my life as a child born in the early 80s, and that certainly has influenced like who I am today as well. You have been very instrumental in the work in Minneapolis, clearly also just around the state of Minnesota. Before the unfortunate execution, assassination of our brother George Floyd, and now Daunte Wright, and even before that, Jamar Clark and Philando Castile. Can you give people, because if they anything like me, before I met you and Marika and a few other folks, I ain't think about Black folks when people said Minnesota. I'm just gonna be honest, you know what I mean? I'm like, Black people, Minnesota. And like now everybody know, like, oh yeah, it's definitely Black people in Minnesota because the cops trying to make sure they kill them all. So can you give people like me who may not be familiar with Minnesota sort of a window into what it's like being Black in Minnesota?
Mm-hmm. Well, I moved here in 2003 to become a law professor at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis. And the University of St. Thomas is a faith-based law school, and it was only 2 years old when I started teaching on the faculty, which I'm very thankful for because it wasn't set in its ways as an institution.
Right.
When I was first recruited here, I was told by a white woman at a different law school how great Minnesota is, saying that Minnesota is a wonderful place to raise your family. Our distressed communities aren't so distressed, and it was like it's progressive and all these things, right? And so that was my mindset for the first couple of years because I lived in a suburb. It was a predominantly white suburb, and so I was away from a lot of the things that was happening in the Black community. And so I stopped reading the mainstream papers and I started picking up the Black newspapers, and
Wow.
that's when I started to see the truth. I started to see educational disparities, criminal justice issues, people being assaulted by the police. I'm like, what? So when I read those things, it had an impact on me. And when I started at St. Thomas, I ran a family law clinic. Mm-hmm. And I just started saying, no, I need to shift towards civil rights. I mean, I had always been about civil rights. Right. When I was 9, I decided I wanted to become a lawyer so that I could address issues in my community. Mm-hmm. I had worked for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law right out of law school. Mm-hmm. And that had always been my passion But when I started reading what was really happening, I'm like, no, I have to figure out how to shift my focus from family law and domestic violence to civil rights. And so I went and I reached out to an elder in the community, a man named Nathaniel Khalik. At the time, he was the president of the St. Paul NAACP. And he had been a long time warrior for our people and racial justice and standing against the police. And a lot of times he was standing alone.
Wow.
You know, his family had come out of the historic Rondo community. And the Rondo community is a historically Black community that was thriving in Minnesota until the government decided to run a freeway through it.
Right.
They destroyed that community, but there's still people who are part of it who are still here. He was one of those individuals. He's still here, he and his wife holding it down. But he became my mentor. And I met with him. I said, you know, I want to learn what's happening to Black folks here. So we sat down for 4 hours and he told me story after story. After that, I said, I am going to help you. I said, I'm going to start a civil rights legal clinic and I'm going to bring my law students so we can help address these situations. And that's what I did. I went back to the team. I said, I want to shift. So they gave me like about a year or two to shut down the family law practice and close those cases, and then launch the Community Justice Project, which became a civil rights legal clinic. And through the Community Justice Project, we worked for 5 years with Nathaniel Khalik and the NAACP to start tackling issues like policing. You know, we helped get rid of a police chief. He was a Black chief, but he was rubber stamping the behavior of white officers who were picking up Black folks. And we're like, no, you got to go. We helped get rid of the sheriff at the time because he ran the largest gang database in the state, and they were using discriminatory criteria to put people in gang databases. And they had kids as young as 14 to people.
Wow.
And as somebody who grew up in South Central LA, I'm like, who is in their 40s gang banging like that? No. I don't know what they doing. So we went to the legislature, we went to media, seriously, and we wound up getting that gang database shut down. And then the sheriff was so unpopular that he lost his bid for re-election, right? And then we formed a program for young Black men. I mean, we were just grinding and bringing law students along to teach them what was happening in the community and how to use their legal skills to stand up and fight with us as Black people. And so that's what I've been doing, you know, all this time. And I'm grateful that God brought me here. Now, I had a few years early on where I was like, oh no, I got to go. Minnesota,
amen. Right.
It is too cold.
I got to go.
I'm like, I'm so serious. I prayed like, Lord, please. But God would make it clear, like honestly, supernaturally, that I was not supposed to leave Minnesota. So I had to just deal with it and say, okay, he assigned me here. He brought me here for a purpose. I need to sit on my spirit and trust that he brought me here for a reason. And so we're seeing as the manifestation of me being obedient to what God called me to do. And he began to tell me back in like 2010 that Minnesota was going to be the next battleground for civil rights.
Wow.
And I could tell that to people, and they looked at me like I lost my mind. I'm like, Minnesota, like I was excited because of God dropping that word in my spirit. So I just kept on doing the work as if what God said was true. And again, now people are saying we're ground zero. This was all part of God's plan. So I'm a vessel. At the end of the day, I understand that I'm just dust. You know, like I'm just dust. I'm just a person who's obedient to God. God had to build my courage and my strength and my tenacity and to teach me how to hear his voice. So now I understand with Harriet Tubman, you know, some I can never understand the fullness. But remember Harriet Tubman as a woman born into slavery, who had been beaten by her slave master, who did not have a formal education, but who was the master conductor of the Underground Railroad, something that many of us feel would have been impossible were it not for God. And she would tell people when they would try to tell her what to do, God is speaking in my ear. You know, that's how she was. So she knew what to do. She carried a shotgun as well. And she not only set herself free, but she went back, we don't know how many times, and freed how many people. Again, something that folks think is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And so now I understand a glimpse of that in terms of how no matter what your situation is,
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to stay stuck in it if you are willing to be open and take risks and demonstrate courage. And yes, there are times when I have wept, times when I've been afraid, times when I wanted to give up, but
right.
time, somehow God will send somebody or somebody around me or give me a glimpse or a sign for me to know that you got to keep on going.
Right.
Take your time and rest and cry and do what you need to do, and then get back up and get out there and keep doing the work. And so that is my mentality surrounding the work that I do.
And so, I wanted to make sure that people heard you and heard like this Genesis story and heard like how long, right, you've been in the work, because I kind of want to shift to some things that I have been watching and having an opportunity to see recently. So I know like you have been on like every national news channel that I can think of recently, right, during the trials of Derek Chauvin. And certainly after the verdict, you was interviewed by Oprah. So you already know, like, people want to hear about that. Like, tell us how that Oprah interview happened.
Okay. So I'm still, I'm still blown away that it happened. But what had happened was, but had a bunch of networks reaching out to me asking for commentary, because I am also a lawyer, in addition to being an activist. Of course. And so, I was doing my best to be responsive this time around, because other times I've let those opportunities lapse because I'm out in the streets. I'm like, it's hard to do both when you're still actively organizing and you have, national outlets reaching out to you. But I said, I'm going to be more conscious, because Minnesota needs to be represented. We don't need talking heads from all over the country who don't really know
don't know nothing about Minnesota, right?
We got fed up when these things would happen before. So one of the networks that reached out to me was CBS, and there was a woman who is a Latina, who is a producer, who reached out to me, and she said, try to keep your calendar clear around the time of the verdict, because we're going to want to interview you. So they wound up interviewing me the day before the verdict. Then she reached out to me that night, and she said, I want Gayle King to interview you after the verdict. And I was like, Gayle King, wow. I've always admired, the work that she does. And so I said, yes, absolutely. So I went to the studio, and when the verdict came down, I was in a room with women of color in media, and we all cried together. Gayle, had tears in her eyes as well. And so I did that interview, and I basically broke down what is really happening here and how we got to this place and how the power of the people helped make that verdict happen. Because you saw the elected officials, you saw a bunch of people, pat themselves on the back, and they left out the fact that we had to fight tooth and nail even to get the case into
the streets.
And you in the media and in the halls of power. We had to demand that they first of all, move the case out of the hands of the county attorney and into the hands of the attorney general. That had never happened before. We had to demand that they increase the charges from 3rd-degree murder to 2nd-degree murder. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the people. We had to demand that they fire all 4 officers and that they charge all 4 officers.
I remember that.
We had to keep fighting. And so when I went on Gayle's show on CBS, I talked about those things and what the role of the people played. So when I was done with that interview, the lady was telling me people were texting, trying to see who I am, all that stuff. And I was like, oh, that's sweet. I didn't, take it beyond that. I just was thankful. And then I left to go downtown with the people where the rallies were being held. And then the next thing you know, I get a call on my cell phone saying, Oprah wants to interview you. I'm like, what?
Right.
And I was thankful that I did not even think Oprah would be watching that interview, because I would have been terrified. Like, honestly, I would have been so nervous. Like, Oprah's watching. But it didn't even enter my mind. And then when they called me, I'm like, wow. So we made arrangements for me to get on a Zoom call a couple of hours later. So I was able to go downtown, celebrate with the people, and then go home. And once I hit, launch on Zoom, there's Oprah.
Wow.
I was in awe. And it was a natural, authentic conversation. Both of us are from Mississippi. So that
was, I forgot about that.
To have that Mississippi, because she didn't know I was from Mississippi, but of course, I mean, I've followed Oprah's work since I was 10. You know, my Black teachers, when I moved to LA, they would say, you know, that I reminded, as a 10-year-old, they would tell me, this is the lady you remind us of. I'm like, what? And so I've watched her since I was 10 years old. So I knew, you know, some of her background. And so we were able to connect during that period of time. And she asked some really great questions. She gave me space as a Black woman activist to just break it down. And then, you know, after that interview ended, they called me for my address. And then the next thing you know, I get this gorgeous bouquet of flowers. I've never seen this in my life. My whole house smells fragrant. And a note from Oprah that I'm going to frame that was really an encouraging note, right? Yeah. And I think, like, I feel like God himself blessed me, you know, with that whole situation. I never in a million years would have thought that that would have happened, because I'm little old me in Minnesota. Like you said, people don't even think Black people live here. And to have have her, you know, and Gail, two women of their stature, look into what's happening here and give me the space to share my perspective, you know. And even when Gail came here, she went to George Floyd Square, and she was able to speak with a young woman. There's a young woman named Janelle Austin, who her mom told her to come home a few days after George Floyd was killed, because they lived down the street. And she became the caretaker of George Floyd Square. And she has like a master's in divinity. She is so humble and so sweet. And she helped maintain that space. It's still maintained. Now, we had demonstrations in the past, and you know, we've occupied spaces. Like, we occupied the 4th Precinct Police Station for 18 days.
I remember that too.
Girl, in the freezing cold, in the midst of blizzards, in the midst of aggressive.
About that, like, you beautiful, right? And you look so amazing right now. But I remember even like, so before that, like before last year, you were literally talking to us on your Facebook Live with milk pouring down your face because you had been tear gassed. And I remember thinking, like, and it was like a war zone. Like, you were like live, and I was like, this shit looked like it's some in Yemen or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we see on the news, like in other countries and stuff. And I was just like the rest of the country, we were just all just like, wow. So like you being real humble right now. When somebody that know you in the comments said, stop lying, you never go home, you always on the streets with us working hard. I was like, she do need to stop lying a little bit, because I be following you.
3 years old. Okay, my youngest child is 3 years old, and I'm always with my baby when, you know, out in the streets, and sometimes she out there with me. At I call her a movement baby. Her name is Asada, after Asada Shakur, but
my daughter's name is Asada too. Yep.
Not a joy to strike a balance, so she's a happy baby too. So no, I do have to come home, and I have 3 other kids, you know, ages 16, 21, and 23.
Yes. So you are a mama.
I'm a mama, you know, out in these streets too. So yes, I do go home. I do try to have a normal life as best I can. But your
wife, your amazing husband, stands right next to you many times, for your protector. I've seen him out there right with you.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he armed and, you know, doing his part.
That's right.
So with that, what you're saying with being tear gas, that was after George Floyd was killed. We had uprisings here,
right?
And the police were very aggressive outside the 3rd Precinct Police Station. That's the police station where Derek Chauvin and the other 3 officers worked. And literally, so just a timeline for those who don't know what happened.
Right.
On Memorial Day last year, I got tagged in a Facebook post that night. And it was tagged by a woman named Ashley Quinones. Her husband, Brian, had been killed by the police like a year to 2 years earlier. And she tagged me, and she's like, MPD killed somebody tonight. They choked him or crushed his throat or something. And I'm like, what? So I go look online. I don't see anything. So I picked up the phone and called the chief of Minneapolis police. And I said, did Minneapolis...
You got it like that. Just got the chief of police on speed dial. Girl, go ahead.
I'm just saying, I called him and I'm like, did MPD kill somebody tonight? And he's like, no. He's like, not that I'm aware of. He said someone died of a medical emergency while they were being taken into custody. He said, I've already transferred the case over to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension to investigate. And I said, well, have you seen video of the incident? And he said, no, I haven't. I said, you need to see some video immediately because the community is saying something different. So then I went back to social media and I said, this is what the community's saying. This is what the chief said. We need to see some video. The next thing I know, that same woman, Ashley, tagged me in what we now know of as that infamous bystander video that 17-year-old Darnella Frazier, a young Black woman, captured, showing the truth of what happened. And when I saw that video, tears started streaming down my face. I knew I just witnessed a public lynching. I knew that MPD had lied about what happened. And so I called the chief. And I was like, Chief Arredondo, they killed that man. They choked the life out of him. You need to see that video. And from there,
and he testified at the trial for people who didn't watch it. Chief, against him, just so y'all know, he ended up testifying against Chauvin, but keep going.
Yeah, he did testify against Chauvin. I mean, Chief Arredondo is our first Black chief in the history of the city of Minneapolis. He became the chief in 2017 following police murdering an affluent white woman. It was an accidental shooting by a Black male Somali officer. And at that point, of course, there was an outcry because the chief at the time was off on vacation, just a whole bunch of stuff. So he became the chief. And he believed his officers.
Get a new chief when you kill a white woman, huh? Girl, go ahead.
And we have been trying to get her out since Jamar was killed, and they tried to cover that up.
Right.
But the officers, so one thing we've said about Arredondo is, okay, he inherited a racist department. He had to sue them. You know, he and several other Black officers
Chris told me about that.
For their racism against them. And so his officers lied to him. They said it was, and he believed it. And so he just went on and followed the standard, you know, their standard procedure and passed the information on to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension to investigate. He had no idea of the magnitude of the situation. And I'm like, So we had that conversation. Then he did his due diligence, saw what happened. I said, you guys need to retract that press release. That is false. And you need to tell the real story. And so later on that night, I got a call from the mayor as well, apologizing about what happened, you know, to our community essentially. And then inviting me to a meeting at City Hall that was going to be held with them and other Black leaders at 7 a.m. And the FBI and the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. By 2 a.m., I was texting back and forth with another organizer, a white woman named Jess Sundin, who I've done a lot of work with. And I said, we need to get an event page up. And so she and I'm like typing in the event page for the first demonstration following George Floyd being killed. And so remember, we're in the midst.
Organized the very first demonstration.
Yes.
Wow.
We're in the midst
of history.
Absolutely. Now, we didn't know. We just knew we had to get in the streets. We're in the midst of a pandemic, right? People scared. The reason I wasn't scared was because we had already been out there for weeks handing out masks and sanitizer. Right. After our allies have been making cloth masks for the medical profession, I'm like, we need that in the Black community because we're more susceptible to dying from COVID-19, and the government is not going to be focused on our needs. So I started going to my Facebook and saying, allies, if you're making cloth masks, make some for the Black community in North Minneapolis. And they did. And then we got an alcohol company to start making sanitizer.
Wow.
So we literally handed out, I don't know, probably thousands of masks and sanitizer. So that meant every weekend we're going out with our masks on into the community. So I wasn't afraid when it was time to put that first event page up. And literally we had the meeting at City Hall. We demand that those cops be fired. The chief takes time, thinks about it. We do a press conference. He announces he's firing all 4 officers. I was one of the— I
remember that.
Yes, I was one of the people who spoke at that press conference. And when I spoke, I thanked the chief, and then I pivoted immediately to say, now all 4 of them need to be charged criminally.
I know he was like, hold on, wait. Oh.
Yeah, but I'm like, no, thank you. Now on to the next. That was just my mindset. And then other Black leaders from the community, were in agreement with that. They were clapping like, yeah. So that sent a signal in terms of what we wanted to have happen next. So after we left,
y'all just turned all the way up.
Yeah, we had to. After we left City Hall, we had that demonstration. Thousands of people out in a pandemic, almost everybody masked.
And they saw that damn video.
Yeah, all of it's on video. We had a rally at the location where George Floyd was killed near 38th in Chicago. After that rally, we marched from there to the 3rd Precinct Police Station. And that's where a day or two, people gathered there every day after that. Actually, that first night, when our demonstration was over, some people stayed behind and the police were ordering them to leave because they were at the back door of the police station like mad, which I don't blame them. And the police came with flashbang grenades then and tear gas then. And they were being aggressive. They were in riot gear for a small, because it went from thousands to a smaller group that stayed behind. And they were already being aggressive. I'm like, this is not going to end well, because all they're going to do with their aggression is escalate the situation. Because people
they always do.
That's what they always do. They don't know how to deal with people in grief and people frustrated. And it's like, if y'all hadn't killed somebody, we wouldn't be out in these streets.
Exactly.
And so what happened was the next day, people gathered in front of the 3rd Precinct again. And then we went out there, of course, wound up getting tear gas. We were out there handing out supplies, and the police were tear gassing. They were shooting people with rubber bullets, flashbang grenades. They was on a roof like snipers. It was horrible. By the end of the week, that police station was burned down. And now
I remember that. I was like, oh.
People were not playing, girl. They was like, no. And I believe that pressure played a role in terms of the government having
Of course it did. I've been saying that everywhere.
Yes, it played a huge role.
No doubt in my mind.
It absolutely, because what did Dr. King say? A riot is the language of the unheard. Nobody wants to riot, but when you don't listen to the people over and over again, and you keep killing people, and there's no other consequences, people do what they do. Because what does our country listen to? Capitalism, their money, their product,
and property damage.
Like, you won't listen to our voices when we're trying to come calm and rationally. So people took matters into their own hands. And honestly, though, a lot of the folks who did the burning of the precinct and some of the stores and things, those were white folks, because their pictures started.
I remember seeing that too. Yeah.
After that, who did that? But while we're dealing with that, right, with the uprising, we have to also deal with white supremacists. They were coming in the community. They were shooting at people. They actually shot people. They were chasing people. They were threatening people. And the media would not cover it. Like, I don't know how many media I had to contact to be like, listen, Black people are in danger. There's no squad cars to be found. No one
wouldn't cover it.
These white supremacists are coming here. They're hurting people, and y'all won't cover it. So, girl, I just got to the place where I'm like, look, I got to go get my license to carry. I'm not out here playing. We finna be in these streets. And so several of us went and got our licenses to carry, because we're like, the government is not going to protect us. They think we brought this on ourselves because we standing out here fighting. And so that's what wound up happening, and our community is still trying to recover from the uprisings that happened.
Right.
And the 3rd Precinct was well known for being violent towards the community. Derek Chauvin had a long list of complaints.
I saw that long history of complaints,
including that he had been involved in other deadly force incidences, and he became a trainer, a field training supervisor. That's why he had those rookies with him on the day that George Floyd was killed.
So he can show them how to kill.
How to kill. And they had been involved in a similar incident together, not too long before, some weeks before they killed George Floyd. So they had no business being on the force, being supervisors, and having access to the community. He lived, 30, 40 minutes away from Minneapolis. Why are you even on the force? But 92% of Minneapolis cops don't even live in Minneapolis. So they come in from these white suburban communities.
White suburbs in the rural areas.
And then they're able to beat people, kill people and get away with it because the deck is stacked against victims of police violence and stacked in favor of police officers and killer cops.
Right. Yeah, I really appreciate, and we showed some pictures. I really appreciate you giving that timeline. I'm telling you, man, like as somebody like that lives in another part of the country and everything, like it was like being on pins and needles, like watching what was happening. But the other, what I would describe as is a beautiful thing, is that protests happened everywhere, including in unlikely places. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and there were protests in like Damascus, which is like, excuse me, you know what I mean? Like, because it's like white people, you know, it's like hardly any, you know, black folks out there, you know what I mean? In other parts, like it was just
all over the world.
All over the world. Yeah, I mean, yes, all over the world. But like, I mean, they turned up in Portland, Oregon. I remember some stuff burned out there. I was just like, you know, this is
like
right. So I was asked this week because I was interviewed on a it's in an NNV channel or whatever, and they were like, "Did you think that Chauvin would be convicted?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like, listen, America learned a lesson. You know what I mean? Like, because you don't see cops get, let alone charged that much, but it's even less likely that you see them convicted. The issue is like Tanisha was saying in the comments, is like them pockets. You know how many insurance claims was paid? Not just in Minneapolis, but like all over the country. You know what I mean? So, I mean, justice, yes, but I'm also clear about, like you said, white supremacy and capitalism. You know, they're married, and so people, you know, there were. I believe I didn't. I'll be honest, like, I didn't think he would get all three, but I'm like, he going to jail. You know, he definitely, because if he don't go to jail, look, America gonna burn. America, not Minneapolis, America.
Absolutely, but our government was preparing for war against its citizens.
Wow. Tell us about that, please.
Yes, if you looked at any of the footage surrounding the courthouse, what you saw was barbed wire fencing, chain link fencing, barricades. They set that up around the courthouse. They also brought in the National Guard. They also formed a multi-jurisdictional task force called Operation Safety Net, which, if people saw what happened in the aftermath of Daunte Wright being killed, he was on April 11th by a Brooklyn Center police officer, a white female. They pulled him over, you know, they racially profiled him, pulled him over for an air freshener hanging on his mirror. And then by the end of the stop, the woman yelled, "Taser, taser," and she actually used her gun to kill him, claiming she thought it was a taser, which I don't believe for 1 minute. And so Black youth, first on the scene, standing up for Daunte. And then after they finally removed his body out of the streets of Brooklyn Center after 5 hours, the Black youth.
Hold on, excuse me?
Yes,
they left his body like they did Michael Brown?
Yes, girl, 5 hours in the streets. We were all there watching.
So they didn't even try to give him medical attention, take him to the hospital, nothing?
They waited 4 minutes before they even tried to render any medical attention. There's an Al Jazeera America report where they interviewed a witness, and they said it took over 4 minutes, because what happened after they shot him, he drove off and he crashed like into another car. They waited 4 minutes before they rendered any medical assistance to him. He was a new father, again, 20 years old. He was biracial, and they treated him like he was not human. And so Black youth were the first on the scene. We came as organizers to lend our support and do our best to try to protect our young people, because of the violence of the police. And so they then, after they finally got his body out the street, they then, the Black youth in our community headed to the Brooklyn Center Police Station. And we sent one of our organizers there to see what was going on. He went and he's like, "Y'all got to come." He's like, "The police are out there in riot gear and they're ready to turn up, you know, on these young people." So of course we all showed up. We were out there with them. They're shooting us, girl, with rubber bullets, tear gas, flashbang grenades. like a war zone. Then they turned out the lights. There were no lights inside or outside the police.
And I remember Facebook messing with y'all's feed, or they were messing with it or something, because you kept trying to go live and I was watching. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I hope she's safe.
That happens all the time, where when we're out there in the midst of these kind of situations, they scramble your signal where you can't get a live video out, right? But we kept trying. So we're out there, girl. You see flashbangs going over our head, over into the apartments that were right behind us.
My God.
And the apartments, have mostly Black families in there, low-income Black families with children. Police did not care.
Of course they did. They was wife. Anyway, go ahead.
Girl, so we're out there, till 1, 2 in the morning. And then one of the organizers, Eli Darris, set up a meeting with the mayor for us to come to City Hall at 10 a.m. So we barely got any sleep, girl, and we had to go to City Hall. And we were in a meeting with the chief, the mayor, and other people from Brooklyn Center. And we started asking some questions. So the chief said, oh, here's what happened. And so I said, is it true that Daunte Wright was pulled over for having an air freshener hanging on his mirror? He's like, oh, the chief's like, I don't have that information. And I'm like, so wait a minute, you're telling us that you're speaking for the police and you don't have that information? No. I'm like, go get that information. Like, I had to pop off on him. Like, I don't know what Black people you think you're talking to, but you're not going to come and give us some BS and not think it's going to be a problem. So I'm like, go get it. So he left, made some calls, got the information. Girl, I was not playing. After what we had gone through, I'm like, y'all turned out the lights. You put people in danger. You shooting stuff at kids. Oh, no, we were not having that. So he got the information and came back and was like, well, it was expired tags. And yes, they also saw the air fresh. This one I knew, nope, y'all was on some BS. Racial profile.
Yeah.
Killed him. And so then they said they were going to release part of the body cam footage. And they said,
part of it. That's how you knew it's some BS too. Yes,
part of it. And then they said, you all stay here. We're going to go to the police station and have a press conference. And then we'll come back and meet with y'all. And I said, I wish we would.
We coming to the press conference.
I'll go have a press conference. I said, come on, y'all. And we all got up and went to the police station. And we finagled our way into the press conference. So anyone who was listening to that press conference,
I saw it. You were live in it. I watched it.
Right. So we're in the press conference, and then suddenly we start asking questions. People were like on social media, like, who are these journalists? And we're like, activists. We're in there asking the questions that journalists should be asking. Like, why is a expired tab a priority in the midst of a pandemic? Don't y'all have crime to fight? Can't nobody get their tabs renewed. It's months. It takes months because we're in a pandemic. So you tell me y'all didn't have better to do than to pull over a young Black man for an air freshener and some tags? Get out of here. So we asked those questions. And then when we got out of that press conference, we went downstairs and we called an impromptu press conference where we told our own narrative because the press was already there. So we said, we're now going to have a press conference.
I know that's right.
Yes, and we did that. And then we went back to City Hall for that follow-up meeting. We met with City Council. We demanded that the chief be fired. We demanded that the city manager be fired, he was a Black man who had been in that position for over 20 years. It was an unelected position where he had authority over the police. So that night when they out shooting this stuff at us with the lights out, he in there with them.
The mayor is Black too, right?
The mayor is a young Black man. Yes, he was newly elected in the last couple of years. He didn't have authority over the police. So
I'm used to that being in Dayton, the city manager form of government. The city manager actually has all the power.
Which is very dangerous because who are they?
Very dangerous.
They're not really accountable to anyone.
Nope.
And so we were like, nope, you got to go. This officer, we want to know her name. She needs to be fired. Like we went through that process and we were there for many hours. And they finally passed a resolution to fire the city manager. And then by the next morning, both of those two officers had resigned, the chief, as well as the officer who killed Daunte Wright. And then we continued having demonstrations in front of the Brooklyn Center police station. Now, all of this is happening while the Chauvin trial is going on. So as organizers, we're doing double duty in Brooklyn Center, helping the young people hold it down, and trying to monitor what's happening with the trial at the same time, and still having demonstrations in downtown Minneapolis around the trial and doing these media interviews. So you can imagine what that was like.
You were out there late the night of the killing, because I remember I looked at my phone. I'm like, it's 1 o'clock. What the hell?
And thankfully, my husband was out there.
I happened to be up. Yeah.
Our daughter, our 23-year-old, was able to be home with our baby and our 16-year-old so that we could be out there. And by the next morning, we at City Hall. Like that's what it takes. And not everybody can
do that. I got you.
Because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of stress. But it's like it's not much different from Rosa Parks having to go document Black women being sexually
raped. Yep.
Government not holding anybody accountable, the media not covering it, but she put herself in danger. Just like Ida B. Wells going around documenting lynching. Right. It's the same kind of thing when you are out on the front lines. You make a decision. Either I'm about this life or I'm not.
You are not a boutique activist. I'm here to let everybody already know that you are not a boutique activist. If you're new to the conversation, just know that. Like, Nekima be in them streets with milk on her face.
Yeah, but I'm not the only one. That's
you're not the only one. Clearly, like there's thousands of people out there.
Yes, but it's a small group that you call at noon. Like, well, let's do an action at 5. Okay. And they drop everything and they get out in them streets. So we have like a squad that, and a lot of us most of us are Black, although we do have some white accomplices.
You better in Minnesota.
Accomplices as well. I'm saying who actually organized with us.
Yeah.
Not just show up. And then we try to mobilize our networks to help. Like if you have a connection to the governor or legislators or the mayor, use your connections to stand up for justice. So we do calls to action all the time, and our network shows up, and they use their white privilege and whatever power they have to stand up, to speak, to make calls, and to apply pressure. Because in a state that's 84% white, they have so much authority over Black bodies. You need white accomplices to stand with.
You have to, yeah.
We shouldn't have to shoulder the load by ourselves. And some of the accomplices will be the same ones saying, do y'all need food? Do you need snacks? Do you need resources? They will bring those things to us. Like my porch may be filled with Gatorade, snacks to bring to a demonstration.
I've seen that, yep.
Yes, and these are accomplices who do what they can do to help us while we are, in the midst of battle. And so through all of that, we can't forget about the power of the people, and particularly young people who they should be focused on school. They should be focused on coming into adulthood. They should be focused on having fun, but they're having to go stand in front of a police station and worry about taking a rubber bullet to the face or leg. Some people, even after George Floyd was killed, we had people who lost their eyes because of the way these cops were shooting these.
I hope they are suing the city and everything. Okay.
Filed a lawsuit. Journalists as well who permanently.
I saw that. And just recently, with the journalists had to meet with y'all governor, and I believe the ACLU of Minnesota filed a lawsuit, First Amendment.
Because of Operation Safety Net, which is what they were going to use on us. If the verdict had come back not guilty and there would have been another uprising, they were ready. They were not only bringing in officers from around the Twin Cities, they went and got
the country.
Ohio and Nebraska, two of the most racist places to come here.
You already know, I know.
And then you have the National Guard, mostly white men. So one time we went to their little headquarters and we staged a protest at midnight outside their headquarters, and we started going in on them. We right out there just calling them out. We decorated the wall with images of people who have been killed. We were demanding justice because normally they work out of that place and then they come out into the community. So we're like, we're going to go where they at.
Go to them.
Feel uncomfortable. And that's exactly what we did. Like we try to be creative, while we are out on the front lines, not so that they won't see us coming the same way every single time.
Right. Yeah. Ohio, I know they wasn't coming, like, not that it matters, but them Ohio officers, whoo, Lord, you see how many Black folks they killing. And it's sad because we don't oftentimes hear their names. Thankfully, people know Tamir Rice's name. People know Ma'Khia Bryant's name, but there's so many others. John Crawford, Henry Green. The list literally goes on, right, in Ohio. But I wanted to connect. I wanted us to talk about this because to me, this is key before we get off of here. Talking about battle, talking about living in an 84% white state, white supremacists all over the place, literally. The year you all had that protest in Minnesota cold, I remember I told Marika, she had me up there one time, was it January? I was like, girl, I love you because I don't like to be cold. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I got there, let me tell you, I got there. Listen, it's different from Ohio cold. I was like, I am never doing this again. So I say all that for the audience to know that I have experienced the Minnesota cold in the dead of winter. You all actually protested in the winter in Minnesota where snow can get hip high.
Yes.
At the police station for 13 days. Not only that,
18
days. 18. Okay.
18 days.
Y'all had white supremacists come in and they actually shoot people.
They shot
Please tell the audience about that, because that also didn't make national news.
No, it didn't. And our media did their best to cover that up. So what happened was after
the media did their best to cover it up.
Yes, because a lot of times they are the public relations arms for the police. So just like that bogus press release that came out after George Floyd was killed, the media takes that and they run with it. No investigative journalism, no listening to the community. That is what they do. And that's why it's so hard when we're telling people this is our experience, because the media is shaping the narrative. They're demonizing victims. And that's what they did when Jamar Clark was killed. Jamar Clark was killed November 15th of 2015. I got the call at 4 a.m. because I was NAACP president at the time. So the man who's now the chief, Arredondo, he was the assistant chief. He called me at 4 a.m. to let me know a young Black man had been killed. And I was like, was he armed? He said, I don't think so. I couldn't go back to sleep. By 7 or 8 a.m., by 7 a.m., I went to Facebook. I started seeing, wait, there were witnesses? There were Black witnesses who were saying that they were there when it happened. They got treated like criminals, physically pushed, sprayed with pepper spray. They weren't even questioned at the time. And I'm like, what? So then I texted NAACP members. I'm like, meet me at the location where this young man was killed. We get there, no cars on the street, nothing. You wouldn't have even known a murder had happened. Oh. All I could see that was evidence was some blood on the leaves in the place by where he was killed. And so I said, let's start knocking on doors and asking people what they saw. And as we started knocking on doors, people started coming out of their homes, telling us what they saw. And then from that period of time, I'm like, do y'all want to hold a press conference and tell your side of the story? Because the government is already holding their press conference, putting their false narrative out. Now, Jamar Clark, 24 years old, he was standing at the back of an ambulance checking on a friend who had injured her ankle. And the EMTs or somebody called 911 on him. The police came, grabbed him in a chokehold, slammed him to the ground. Within 61 seconds, they shot him in the head at point blank range and killed him.
What?
Yes, that is what happened.
Oh, he was standing
at the back of.
Are those ambulance people, whatever they are they still employed?
Yeah, they're still employed. I'm sure they're still employed. The police who killed him still employed. So what happened was, from that point, people gathered. We held a counter press conference where people got to speak their truth. And then at one point, we walked to the vestibule because the police station was right up the street from there. We walked to the police station and we started banging on the door because they had it locked. And we were like, let us in, let us in. And first they were laughing. The police looking at us laughing. Girl, as they saw us that we would not go away, they started getting scared. So I'm like, see, that's what y'all get for what y'all, because it was just that police precinct had killed so many people and abused so many people and gotten away with it. So what happened was that some of our BLM activists and community members decided to occupy that vestibule. of the police precinct because that door opens. So they had sleeping bags and everything, and they were in there for like 2 days. On the third day, when the police were forced to reveal the names of the officers who killed Jamar Clark, they came in and pulled guns out on them and made them leave the vestibule. So then they put out an SOS call for anybody to come to the third precinct who could.
These cops are off the fucking hook.
Yes, girl, they've been allowed to get away with this all these years. So
this is the Klan.
Exactly. And what did the FBI tell us over 5 years ago? That many police departments around the nation have been infiltrated by white supremacist groups and the KKK. And I do believe that that's part of why these killings happen. And so anyway, they did an SOS call. We all came to the 4th precinct and we refused to leave. We literally threw rain, sleet, snow, rubber bullets, police on the roof, aggression. We would not leave. People pitched tents. We lit fires in the street. People brought food. Allies brought food, water coats. People brought hot meals. And we basically turned the lawn of the 4th precinct and the streets into a community gathering space to demand justice for Jamar. And we did not leave until they forced us to leave. They came in the middle of the night with bulldozers and forced us out and said, if you don't leave now, you're going to be arrested. That's the only reason it ended. People were not fazed by the cold.
The bulldozers, though.
And so here's one of the things that's interesting out of that experience, right? So, of course, we continued demanding justice. Those officers weren't held accountable. We disrupted the county attorney's press conferences. Like, we did everything that we could do. But what happened was, because of that experience, around the same time, Minneapolis Public Schools was about to make a decision regarding their new superintendent. And they had basically brought in a Latino candidate, and then they muddied up his candidacy so that they could go to their next person who had been a Black man who was part of the system. And they were trying to install him without any community engagement. Because we had been out in those streets for 18 days in the freezing cold, we wound up saying, we're going to disrupt this meeting because they won't stop and hear from the community. So we wound up shutting down the school board meeting. Many of us who had been a part of the 4th precinct, and guess what? They called the police on us. And guess what? The inspector from the 4th precinct showed up at the school board and they told him what happened. He said, well, who is it? And he was basically like Nekima and them. He was like, bye. He turned and got up out of there. And we were like, we ain't scared. Call whoever you gonna call. We done been outside for 18 days freezing, taking on the government. We in a warm place. You gonna have to lead us out here in handcuffs. Because you was not gonna put a superintendent in here without hearing from these people, period. So they had no choice without the police to intervene and protect us. They had no choice but to listen to us. And so one of the things that our education chair, Leslie Redmond, said, we want a community process. And that's what we got, so that the community could have a say in. And so that's how, like, even our fight for policing translated over to our fight to demand education justice.
That's right.
You've been through all that. You like, call the police.
Ain't nobody scared of them, clearly. Oh my God.
We got up out of there. Like, these people. I was like, all power to the people. Praise the Lord. So that's why you see us out there, like, tough and consistent, because of what we've been through.
Right.
To literally weather storms,
yes, y'all did.
In the middle of freezing cold winter. And so it's, at that point, we just like, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Last question before we wrap, because I know you clearly probably got some other protests to organize and do some crazy shit that you always be doing, but I love it and I love you. Last question. What's next, right? Where do we go from here from the Minnesota perspective?
Well, we got 3 cops in the pipeline who helped kill George Floyd. We want them to be convicted.
Yeah.
We also want Kim Potter to be convicted. We've been holding protests outside the county attorney's home, 40 minutes away from here, demanding that he bring murder charges and not just manslaughter charges. We want to see an office of the special prosecutor, so that these cases are taken out of the hands of county attorneys. Right. Most of us around the country can't trust county attorneys.
Not at all.
killer cops because they work hand in hand with the police. They rely on the police to prosecute citizens. They have no incentive to hold them accountable. So I think that nationwide, that's what we ought to be demanding. We ought to be demanding police accountability legislation as well. We have 8 bills right now pending at the legislature.
Oh, this you right here. This is you talking to the attorney.
Running the county attorney and demanding murder charges. And we brought over 100 people outside his little white neighborhood in Stillwater. He wasn't ready. This is us marching down the street of his block, demanding that he bring murder charges. And so we will continue to apply pressure to the system. We have 8 bills pending at the legislature that people can take a look at, going to mncoalition.org if you want to see that legislation. We also bring one of my sisters in the struggle, Catrice Jackson, here to help educate white women about white women violence and how to truly show up as allies and accomplices. People can find
Catrice. Yes.
Yes, Catrice is incredible. People can find her on Amazon.com, but she helps get white women in a place where
I have an opportunity to work with her. Amazing.
Accomplices and not use their weapons against us while we out here trying to fight for justice. All those things work hand in hand to get
that white woman that called y'all the N-word this weekend definitely needs some Catrice in her life.
Yes. Oh no, she got fired. She's fired.
She just ought to been fired.
Her husband now, who is a correctional officer, he is being investigated. My expectation is that he's going to be fired. And then we found another guy who was aggressive, a former correctional officer who works for the Twins. So now we've taken it to the president of the Twins to say, look, you honored George Floyd. You canceled the game after Daunte Wright was killed. Now deal with this employee who was aggressive towards our march because he didn't want to see Black lives marching through the streets of an all-white neighborhood. So we're going to continue doing those things. Everybody has a role to play. All people have to do is figure out, what is my role? What can I do to stand up and fight and be relentless in the pursuit of justice? We have all the comforts and luxuries that Harriet Tubman didn't have, Frederick Douglass didn't have, Nat Turner didn't have, all the people who came before us, and yet they still stood up and fight. We have no excuse. So roll up your sleeves and be prepared to stand up for your people by, as what Jelani Hussein says, copying Malcolm X by any means necessary.
That's it. That's it. And I feel like that's the mic drop. Girl, I appreciate you so much. You are amazing. Like the audience has been amazing as well. Like this has been like one of the most well-watched shows I've had in a while. As you can imagine, people are glued because they've consistently been listening to you storytelling, right? Like just, you know, giving us a play-by-play literally of your years of demanding justice for Black folks, and specifically those who have been executed, because that's what it is, a public lynching by the police department, aka the new form of the KKK, an evolved version of the KKK. This has been amazing. As you know, you can always, you know, come back here. You're welcome. You always have a place on this platform. You already know that. And just all the love and admiration for you, and continue to take care of yourself too during this time. You know,
my voice is finally coming back.
Right.
I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for all the people who watched today's show. I'm thankful for you with your platform and all the advocacy that you do on behalf of children. I'm thankful for those folks who use their voices to stand up, fight back, and their resources and everything else. That's what it's going to take for us to change what is happening. So thank y'all. And I'll probably see some of y'all out in the streets. So
you already know, like, your people been in the comments, like, man, like just giving you all the love and all the shouts out. So take care, everybody. Same place, same time next week. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all for joining today and listening to our sister, Nekima Levy Armstrong. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.